The cruel laughter echoed through Westmont Academy's marble-floored cafeteria as Trevor Kingston yanked something from the head of the girl sitting alone. A brown wig fell to the polished stone floor with a sickening thud. 200 students froze in absolute silence, staring at Sophia Blake's face. The left half scarred from forehead to chin, skin twisted like melted wax. "Freaks like you belong in a circus, not a school," Trevor sneered, his voice carrying through the sound system. But instead of crying or running away, Sophia slowly stood up, her ice-blue eyes locking directly onto the security camera in the upper right corner. In 15 minutes, the entire world would know who the real monster was. The morning had started like any other at the prestigious Connecticut boarding school where bloodlines mattered more than report cards. Sophia had arrived at 7:30 a.m., an hour before most students, to use the library resources her cramped dormitory room couldn't provide. She'd been preparing for the National Merit Scholarship competition, the kind of achievement that could secure her future beyond Westmont's ivory towers. Her carefully maintained brown wig covered scars that told a story she wasn't ready to share, wounds that ran deeper than the surface damage everyone could see. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story of transformation and justice, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here. Stories like Sophia's need to be heard, and you make that possible. If this story moves you or reminds you of someone who's faced similar struggles, please consider leaving a comment below. Your experiences create a community where everyone feels less alone. If you'd like to help us continue sharing these powerful stories of courage and justice, there's a small thanks button right beneath this video. Every contribution helps us reach more people who need to hear that they're not powerless, that bullies don't always win, and that sometimes the underdogs write the best endings. Trevor Sinclair had noticed Sophia immediately when she transferred to Westmont 3 weeks earlier. Everything about her screamed easy target. The scholarship status, the obvious attempt to hide her disfigurement, the way she sat alone during meals while other students formed their exclusive circles. What he didn't know was that Sophia Blake had been planning for someone exactly like him. She'd researched Westmont's social hierarchy, identified the power players, and most importantly, she'd come prepared. The attack in the cafeteria wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was orchestrated humiliation. Trevor had spent the previous night in group chats with his inner circle, planning the perfect moment to assert dominance over the new girl who dared to exist in their space. Jessica Walsh, his girlfriend and daughter of pharmaceutical CEO Marcus Walsh, had suggested filming everything for social media. Marcus Reed, the lineman who served as Trevor's muscle, had positioned himself to block any potential escape routes. They thought they were hunting a wounded deer. They had no idea they were poking a sleeping dragon. As Sophia stood there, wig at her feet and scar exposed to the world, something shifted in the cafeteria's atmosphere. The silence wasn't just shock. It was anticipation. Students pulled out phones, some to record what they assumed would be a breakdown, others sensing that something unprecedented was about to unfold. But Sophia didn't collapse. Instead, she reached into her backpack with movements so precise and deliberate that several students later said it reminded them of a surgeon preparing for an operation. "What's wrong, freak?" Trevor taunted, emboldened by the crowd's attention. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you finally realizing where you belong?" His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, whose father's position as state senator had always provided immunity from accountability. But as Sophia's hand emerged from her bag with a small device, Trevor's smirk began to falter. The device in Sophia's hand looked innocent enough. A smartphone with what appeared to be a standard recording app. But this wasn't ordinary technology. While Trevor continued his verbal assault, Sophia had secretly activated a professional-grade audio capture system that not only recorded crystal-clear sound in noisy environments, but also automatically encrypted, time-stamped, and synchronized everything to secure cloud storage. Every threat, every cruel laugh, every word of harassment was being preserved as unshakable legal evidence. This wasn't just documentation, it was the foundation of a federal case. "You think recording me is going to help?" Trevor laughed, stepping closer with the kind of predatory confidence that had served him well in the past. "Do you know who my father is? One phone call, and you'll be back in whatever trailer park you crawled out of." What he didn't see was the way Sophia's lips curved into the slightest smile, or how her posture shifted almost imperceptibly into something that looked less like a victim and more like someone positioning for combat. The escalation that followed would later be dissected frame by frame in courtrooms and congressional hearings. Trevor's attacks became increasingly bold, shoving Sophia's books off tables, accidentally bumping into her in hallways, encouraging his friends to join in the harassment. Each incident was carefully documented, not just by Sophia's recording devices, but by the school's own security cameras that she seemed to know the exact positions of. When Coach Bradley turned a blind eye to Trevor's behavior during practice, when Principal Davidson dismissed Sophia's formal complaints with barely concealed irritation, when Jessica Walsh began a coordinated social media campaign designed to humiliate and isolate, all of it was being captured by someone who understood exactly how the system worked and how to use it against itself. But it was during lunch on a Thursday that the first crack appeared in Trevor's armor. He'd cornered Sophia near the trophy case, away from the main crowd but not from the security cameras she'd positioned herself to use. "You're really starting to annoy me," he said, placing his hand against the wall beside her head in what observers later described as a classic intimidation pose. "Maybe it's time someone taught you what happens to freaks who don't know their place." Instead of cowering, Sophia looked up at him with those ice-blue eyes and said, "Are you familiar with USC Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act?" Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but something in her tone made Trevor take an unconscious step backward. "Or perhaps you'd prefer to discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act and how it applies to educational institutions receiving federal funding?" The precision of her legal knowledge hit Trevor like a physical blow. This wasn't random trivia. This was someone who understood the law well enough to quote specific statutes from memory. For the first time since starting his campaign against her, doubt flickered across his features. But pride and privilege are powerful drugs, and Trevor had been using both his entire life. That evening, as Trevor planned his next move in the group chat, his friends called Kings of Westmont, he had no idea that someone else was reading every word. Sophia's technical skills extended far beyond audio recording. The phone system Trevor's crew used for their coordination had been compromised weeks earlier. Every message copied and stored, alongside the growing mountain of evidence that would soon bring down not just Trevor, but the entire network of corruption that protected him. The breakthrough came through a seemingly innocent phone call Sophia made during study hall. Students sitting nearby heard only fragments: Delta 77, initiate protocol, and package confirmed, target acquired. But the military precision of the language sent ripples of curiosity through the study hall. When asked about it later, Sophia just smiled and said she was coordinating a group project. The truth was far more complex and infinitely more dangerous for Trevor and his allies. Jessica Walsh, perhaps sensing that something was shifting in the power dynamic, decided to escalate her own campaign. The social media assault that followed was vicious and coordinated, designed to humiliate Sophia not just at school, but in the broader digital landscape, where reputation could be destroyed with viral efficiency. Photos of Sophia without her wig, taken secretly and edited for maximum cruelty, began appearing across multiple platforms. Comments calling her a circus freak, and worse, flooded in from accounts that Jessica's father's marketing team had created. But Jessica had made a critical error. In her eagerness to hurt Sophia, she'd forgotten that everything digital leaves traces, and those traces could be followed by someone with the right skills and resources. Within hours of the photos appearing online, they began disappearing just as quickly, replaced by a very different kind of content. Screenshots of the group chats where Jessica had coordinated the attack, recordings of phone calls where she'd bragged about destroying the freak, and most damaging of all, evidence that she'd been using her father's pharmaceutical connections to supply performance-enhancing drugs to the football team. The reversal was so swift and complete that Jessica found herself on the defensive for the first time in her privileged life. Students who'd participated in mocking Sophia suddenly found their own secrets exposed. Academic fraud, drug use, and worse. It was as if someone had turned a spotlight on the darkest corners of Westmont's elite culture, revealing corruption that went far beyond simple bullying. Trevor, watching his girlfriend's social empire crumble, made the decision that would ultimately destroy him. On a Friday afternoon, as students streamed toward weekend freedom, he cornered Sophia in the parking garage. But this time, he didn't come alone. Marcus Reed and two other football players flanked him, their intentions clear in the way they moved to block exit routes. "This ends now," Trevor snarled, his usual composure cracking under the pressure of watching his world unravel. "I don't know how you're doing it, but you're going to stop, or things are going to get very unpleasant for you." The threat was unmistakable, and for a moment, Sophia's calm facade seemed to waver. She looked smaller, more vulnerable, exactly like the victim Trevor had always assumed she was. But then, something extraordinary happened. Sophia reached up with both hands and, in one fluid motion, removed her wig completely. The shocked gasps from Trevor's crew echoed through the concrete space, as they saw not just the extent of her scars, but something else entirely. A tiny, sophisticated earpiece that definitely wasn't standard teenage technology. "This is Agent Blake," she said in a voice that carried none of the uncertainty they'd grown accustomed to. "Suspects have made direct physical threats and are currently attempting to intimidate a federal witness. Request immediate backup." The transformation was so complete, so sudden, that for several seconds no one moved. The scarred, vulnerable scholarship student had vanished, replaced by someone who radiated authority and dangerous competence. Trevor's face went through several shades of pale as the implications hit him. You're not," he stammered, but Sophia cut him off with a look that could have frozen flame. "I'm exactly what I need to be," she said calmly, as the sound of approaching sirens began to echo through the parking garage. "And right now, what I need to be is the person who brings down you and everyone who protected you." The next few minutes would be replayed on news broadcasts across the nation, analyzed by legal experts and social media commentators, and ultimately transform how the entire country thought about bullying, privilege, and justice. The FBI tactical team that swarmed into Westmont Academy's parking garage moved with the precision of a military operation. Agent Martinez, a 20-year veteran with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, approached the scene where Trevor Kingston and his crew stood frozen in disbelief. "Trevor Kingston, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit hate crimes, witness intimidation, and distribution of controlled substances," Martinez announced, his voice cutting through the autumn air like a blade. The handcuffs clicking around Trevor's wrists produced a sound that would haunt his nightmares for years to come. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice cracking with the first genuine fear he'd ever experienced. "My father will have your badges. You can't do this to me." But Agent Martinez had heard these protests countless times before from privileged kids who'd never learned that money couldn't buy immunity from federal law. As the arrest unfolded, students and faculty gathered at every window overlooking the parking area. Phone cameras captured every moment as the quarterback who'd terrorized Westmont for 4 years was led away in federal custody. The video would rack up 50 million views within 6 hours, becoming the most viral arrest footage in social media history. But the story was just beginning to unfold. Principal Davidson rushed onto the scene, his face flushed with panic and barely contained rage. "Agent Martinez, I demand an explanation. This is highly irregular. Senator Kingston will hear about this outrageous abuse of federal authority." His bluster died the moment Sophia turned those ice-blue eyes on him, her expression conveying a message that needed no words. "Your turn is coming." In the secure data storage facility where Sophia had been uploading evidence for weeks, federal prosecutors were already building cases that would reshape the entire private education system. The platform she'd been using wasn't just cloud storage. It was a sophisticated evidence management system designed specifically for complex federal investigations. Every recording, every screenshot, every document had been automatically verified, encrypted, and prepared for courtroom presentation. The technology represented years of development by cybersecurity experts who understood that fighting institutional corruption required tools as sophisticated as the systems protecting it. The revelation of Sophia's true identity sent shockwaves through media outlets across the nation. She wasn't just a scholarship student. She was the daughter of Judge William Blake, the federal magistrate who had been killed 3 years earlier while investigating corruption in educational institutions. The car accident that had claimed both her parents and left her scarred hadn't been random misfortune. It had been assassination, and Sophia Blake had spent 3 years training with federal agents to infiltrate the very networks that had destroyed her family. Jessica Walsh's arrest came 24 hours later, at her family's estate in Greenwich. The pharmaceutical heiress was charged with drug trafficking, conspiracy, and cyberbullying under federal hate crime statutes. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Not just the social media campaigns she'd orchestrated, but financial records showing payments to students for distributing controlled substances throughout elite boarding schools across New England. Her father's company's stock plummeted 60% in pre-market trading as federal investigators seized corporate records dating back a decade. The courtroom where Trevor's preliminary hearing took place was packed beyond capacity. News vans lined the street outside, and protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Judge Blake," and "No more elite immunity." When Sophia took the witness stand, the transformation from scarred victim to federal agent was complete. She testified with clinical precision about the systematic harassment, the drug distribution network, and the web of corruption that protected privileged students while destroying anyone who threatened their dominance. Trevor's defense attorney, one of the most expensive legal minds money could buy, attempted to portray his client as a typical teenager who'd made poor choices. "Your Honor, this was nothing more than schoolyard bullying that got out of hand. To treat this as a federal case is prosecutorial overreach of the highest order." But when Sophia presented audio recordings of Trevor explicitly discussing plans to arrange an accident for her, the defense strategy crumbled like a house built on sand. The prosecutor, a brilliant woman named Sarah Chen, who'd built her career fighting institutional corruption, presented a case that was devastating in its completeness. "This wasn't bullying, Your Honor. This was a conspiracy to silence a federal witness using the same tactics that killed Judge Blake. These defendants believed their wealth and connections made them untouchable. They were wrong. Senator Kingston's arrival at the courthouse created a media frenzy that overshadowed even his son's arrest. The powerful politician who'd spent 2 decades building a reputation as a champion of law and order found himself facing questions about campaign contributions from pharmaceutical companies, mysterious payments to school administrators, and his relationship with the criminal networks his son had been working for. When reporters asked if he planned to use his influence to help Trevor, his stammered non-answer became a meme that destroyed his political career overnight. The federal investigation that Sophia's evidence had triggered expanded far beyond Westmont Academy. Schools across the country found themselves under scrutiny as patterns of corruption emerged that spanned state lines and implicated dozens of prominent families. The private education system that had protected the children of the wealthy while exploiting scholarship students like Sophia faced a reckoning that would transform American education forever. During the trial, which was live-streamed to a global audience of millions, Sophia's testimony revealed the full scope of her 3-year investigation. She'd attended 5 different elite schools, each time gathering evidence of systematic abuse, drug trafficking, and academic fraud. Westmont had been the final target, chosen because it represented the apex of elite privilege and the heart of the network that had killed her parents. Trevor's sentencing hearing drew protesters from across the nation. Disability rights advocates, anti-bullying organizations, and families of other victims filled the courthouse steps as Judge Patricia Morrison prepared to deliver justice. When she sentenced Trevor Kingston to 15 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed under federal hate crime statutes, the cheers outside could be heard throughout the building. But it was Jessica Walsh's sentencing that truly captured the nation's attention. The pharmaceutical heiress who'd orchestrated cyber campaigns against vulnerable students received 20 years for drug trafficking and conspiracy charges. As federal marshals led her away, she turned to Sophia with pure hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed. "There are others. They'll come for you." Sophia's response would be quoted in news articles for months afterward. "Let them come. I'll be ready." Principal Davidson's arrest came during what was supposed to be his retirement celebration. Federal agents served warrants as he cut into a cake, celebrating 30 years of educational leadership. The evidence against him included bank records showing payments from multiple wealthy families, communication records proving he'd deliberately ignored criminal behavior, and most damning of all, emails discussing plans to handle the Blake problem shortly before Judge Blake's death. The civil lawsuit that followed broke new ground in educational law. Sophia, representing herself with assistance from civil rights attorneys, sued not just individual defendants, but the entire system that had protected them. The settlement, $200 million paid by insurance companies representing dozens of elite schools, was used to establish the Judge William Blake Foundation, dedicated to protecting vulnerable students and investigating educational corruption. The media attention surrounding the case created a movement that spread far beyond any single school or incident. Students across the country began speaking out about abuse they'd suffered in silence, armed with new legal protections and technological tools inspired by Sophia's investigation. The hashtag #SophiaStrong became a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong, that their poverty or disability or difference made them less worthy of respect and protection. But even as justice was being served, new threats were emerging. The network that had protected Trevor and Jessica ran deeper than anyone had imagined, with connections reaching into government agencies, corporate boardrooms, and international criminal organizations. 3 months after Trevor's sentencing, Sophia received a message on a secure federal channel. Phase 1 complete. Recommend immediate transition to Phase 2. New targets identified. Authorization pending. Standing in her new role as the youngest federal consultant in bureau history, Sophia reviewed files on her next assignment. Another school, another network of corruption, another group of privileged predators who believed themselves untouchable. The scars on her face had healed as much as they ever would, but they no longer defined her. They were badges of honor now, proof that she'd survived the worst that wealth and privilege could inflict, and emerged stronger than ever. The final scene played out in a congressional hearing room where Sophia testified before lawmakers about the systemic failures that had allowed educational corruption to flourish unchecked. Cameras captured her composed testimony as she detailed recommendations for reform that would protect millions of students across the nation. When Senator Williams asked what message she had for other young people facing similar situations, her response became the defining quote of her generation. Document everything. Trust the process. And remember that sometimes the people who try to break you are actually showing you exactly how strong you really are. But as she left the Capitol building that evening, a brief flash caught her attention. Sunlight reflecting off something metallic in the hand of a figure watching from across the street. The watcher melted into the crowd before she could get a clear look. But the message was unmistakable. The war wasn't over. It was evolving. Later that night, in the secure apartment where federal agents had relocated her, Sophia received an encrypted message that made her blood run cold. "You cost us Trevor Kingston. Now we'll take something from you. The game has new rules now." She stared at the screen for a long moment, then reached for the secure phone that connected her directly to FBI headquarters. "This is Agent Blake," she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had terrified Trevor Kingston in that parking garage months earlier. "I need to report a credible threat and request authorization for expanded surveillance protocols." As she began outlining the security measures that would be necessary for her next assignment, Sophia allowed herself a small smile. Trevor Kingston had thought he was hunting a wounded deer. Jessica Walsh had believed she was destroying a helpless victim. They'd all underestimated the daughter of Judge William Blake, and it had cost them everything. Now others were making the same mistake, and Sophia Blake was ready to teach them the same lesson. Some people think the story ends with handcuffs and sentencing. They're wrong. For people like Sophia Blake, justice isn't a destination. It's a journey that never truly ends.